All right, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast,
And I'm Kyle from GoatFilmReviews.com.
and we are living in November 2019. So, what other movie should we be talking about? Of course, we're going to talk about Blade Runner.
Can't wait. So we may not be in Los Angeles right now, but you don't know that.
Maybe.
But we are definitely living in the future. We are living in the time of Blade Runner. And what better time to talk about it? It's one of those films that didn't get the love it got when it came out. Its sequel didn't get the love it got when it came out. And so why
we're
not?
still talking about it.
Let's push it back into the discussion again, shall we? For those of you that don't know, the film is based on a novel by Philip K. Dick.
Yes, it is.
What is it? Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Yes, because in the book, not only are there replicants of people, but also animals.
Yeah.
So it's consider a class of hierarchy if you have a real animal, like just for a pet, like a cow, cattle, birds, whatever. And they use that in the movie Blade Runner.
Yep. And I'd like to think that I'm royalty because I do have some cats. You're royalty.
Yeah,
some
we would
real
do.
dogs,
Yeah, dogs. So I'm upper class.
So who better to talk about the film today? So it's directed by Ridley Scott, stars Harrison Ford, who at the time had been really known for Indiana Jones, Han Solo, and kind of like taking on a very different kind of hero this time around. So we're going to be getting into like the merits of the film, its cultural standing, like how it has aged, and some of the background on the film too, because this film had a really interesting background that led to where it is right now. So we're going to be talking about that and a lot more today on Kyle and Nick on Film. So stay tuned. All right, guys, welcome back to Kyle and Nick on Film. We are going to talk Blade Runner today, and we're going to get right into it. Nick, for you, I feel like this is a perfect film for you. I know with your background of really liking film noir and a lot of the elements, sci-fi related too. Like this is just one of those films that when you said that you love this movie, I'm like, yeah,
of course,
obviously.
Right. And I'm still waiting for the some fans like me really want a black and white version of this movie. I'll give me my money, please. We want to see a black and white version of this movie.
Nick, there's like 8 cuts of the film. Just let it happen. Just let it go, man. We've got enough.
If you can do those 8 cuts, why can't you just do it in a black and white version? But and then some people have put on stills of what it looked like in black and white. It looks marvelous. But yeah, if you're looking for an action sci-fi, you're not going to get it.
Yeah,
this is more of a visceral.
And I think that's the film that was sold to me when I first watched it. I was sold a film that was going to be this action sci-fi epic in a way, and it's epic in the sense that it deals with very big themes. It's not an epic in terms of its story.
And people
it's
like
very small.
People like, hey, we got Ridley Scott. He did Alien. He's done all these other movies. We got Harrison Ford. He's done Indiana Jones. We got Star Wars. Put them together. We're gonna have some explosions, sci-fi, and all that stuff. And it just doesn't. That's what was not promised. Was promised but not delivered.
Yeah. And speaking of like how small, it's like the film even just started out like its very first form was a really small version of the film. Hampton Fancher was looking for something to make. He came across the Philip K. Dick work and he kind of liked it, kind of didn't, and kind of like decided to do his own thing. And his first screenplay apparently just had like scenes in apartments. And like there was a few scenes on the street, but it was like minimal actors. Like he like really boiled it down to almost nothing. And then, as other people were brought onto the project, it became a little bit bigger. And especially with Ridley Scott taking over the film, like he really wanted to do, because he had come off the film version of Dune to do this. So like he really wanted his sci-fi spectacle piece.
Yeah, people forget about that.
That really meant a lot,
Ridley Scott was initially supposed to do Dune, and then he turned that down to do this one.
Yeah, and so he was the one who actually read the script in, I think it's second or third draft, and said, I see a film noir here. I really see that. Yeah. And the first couple drafts of the script had that voiceover narration piece that's so prominent in film noir. Our
the narration,
molasses chewing lead, talking right to the camera. And I think that's where his kind of like first idea came into it, is like, I want to make this as a film noir. And that's actually my favorite kind of film noir, is when it's not traditional, when it's things like set with androids and robots, or in the case of like Watchmen, there's a dead superhero and we got to figure out who it is. I love those kinds of things that play with the narrative of like what film noir can actually be. They really like take it above itself and make something different out of it. So coming from your background in film noir, like, why don't you tell me a little bit about like what about the story excites you and what you really love about it?
The whole point of the really exciting is you don't get clear answers. Mm-hmm. You never get a clear answer of anything. Even the great speech at the end, the replicants talk about all this like stuff he saw. Well, how did you see all this stuff? What did you do to get all this stuff? In fact, you don't get a clear understanding of Deckard. Is he a real person? Is he a replicant? You get some teases of what he could be. What can there's the dream sequence of they added into the director's cut of a horse and everything, and the horse little prop that they have to. So what's fascinating is you get a resolve, but you don't get any answers.
Yeah, and even just every version of the film gives you varying degrees of answers.
Yeah.
You know, like I think it was the final cut where they really like went full on with this like unicorn sequence here, which I think is
they played
just
on that
baller
hard,
and
yeah.
insane. It's that sequence that adds in another layer of wait, what's going on here? It's like that almost like Inception level of what's happening here.
You're right.
Was
It's
the
very
first
much
film that left you on that, like, really, wait a second, what did I see? And like, I can't imagine being someone who came out of the theater and watched this, because I would have had to just go right back in and watch it again.
There was a lot of frustration because people wanted an action movie and they just wasn't going to get it. I think a lot of people left. It got poor reviews when it came out. Actually, it came out at the same time as The Thing, and they had these two movies in theaters that people didn't really like that are just have a longevity to them. And the other thing that I think Philip K. Dick did in his book and translated pretty well in this movie is a theme of empathy. Really, can you be a good person without having it? Can you be a good person not having really care about anybody else? And if you look at the way it's portrayed in the movies, the characters and everything, they don't have an empathy for each other. In fact, even in the book, Pris has an insect and she's casually plucking the legs off of it, and there's no reaction to her, even though she's a replicant. And that was Philip K. Dick's really hardcore to this series and this story was empathy is at the driving motion to be a good person.
Yeah. And I think that's something where he, because of how the screenwriter didn't really even like the source material, when Philip K. Dick read an early draft of the screenplay, he hated it. He really did not like this movie. It was almost a thing where it's like, I think he was probably happy it had a diffdifferent title, just because then no one's going to think about me.
It definitely needed a different title. Right?
Yeah, it's not one that would have worked at all.
Because Blade Runner is not even mentioned, the word is not even in the book at all.
No, I think it comes from a William S. Burroughs novel that's called Blade Runner. And it's like, okay, but really it has nothing to do with any of that. And I think that comes through with like the initial idea of who to cast for Deckard. Because I know that the studio wanted to go with Dustin Hoffman. Like they wanted a really not action lead character. There was Dustin Hoffman, Peter Falk, Al Pacino, Nick Nolte, Burt Reynolds. I know when the original screenplay was written, it was written as though like Robert Mitchum was Deckard. That was the original idea.
And that would, based on all the actors you're saying, they definitely wanted to stick to the noir template. Yeah. They don't want an action person.
No, and I think it was Barbara Hershey who suggested Harrison Ford for the role. And Ridley Scott was able to reach out to people that had worked with Ford, because Ford is coming out a lot here. He'd done, I think, Conversation? He was in with that. And
did
then
a comedy with Gene Wilder.
Yeah. and then he comes off of like Han Solo in 2 Star Wars films that are both very successful. Indiana Jones was iconic, almost no one had finished filming. In fact, they'd wanted Deckard to be a guy that wore a fedora. And then when they cast Ford, it's like, we got to lose the fedora now. We can't do this. So what do you think about Harrison Ford as Deckard? Like, do you think he pulls off the character, or is he a bit too actiony, or what kind of
right? When you talk about Harrison Ford, you're not really talking about somebody who's going to win an Academy Award for acting. I really think he's just a presence. He just has a fantastic presence in a movie, and that's what Deckard is just somebody that is assigned a job. He doesn't want to do it, but he's kind of forced his hand to do it because in his mind is, am I being a good guy doing this? Am I being a bad guy doing this? So I don't think it demands a lot from you, but it demands a lot of chewing up the scene.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, he was one of those guys where like he fits the mold well, and I think he's more surprising in that role. I think he really commands it more than I expected him to. But the problem is he's noted for those kinds of movies. He's noted for those big things. And so it's not a fault on him. It's just like, this is who we expect when we hear Harrison Ford is in a movie. And I think he does use a little bit more nuance in this film than I had expected to see from him, which is something kind of cool.
Yeah, it especially what's nice is the feature, the set direction, the art direction is fantastic. So even though Harrison is the headlining of the movie, the whole dominant thing of the movie is the art direction, the cinematography is what really carries the movie. Another aspect of this book really concentrate on religion.
Mm-hmm.
There's a cult that's being developed, a religion in the book. That gets subtracted from the movie, which is fascinating because really Scott really works on mythologies, and he's done a couple movies.
And
that
clearly, he enjoys talking about religion. If you've seen his
Right.
prequels,
right, Kingdom of Heaven with Orlando Bloom, and he did one with Kristen Bale being Moses. So he's not as shy from working with religion, and it's fascinating that he, with the script, kind of took it out of there.
Yeah, that's true. And part of that might have been that whole piece with Hampton Fancher, where like they're really and bringing in David Peebles, whose whole his whole thing was to take this out of a cerebral film and make it into a movie. Like that was the whole reason of bringing in the second writer, was that Fancher's known for he gets really inside his own head. He gets really thinky about it. But Thinky works on the page. Thinky doesn't always work on the screen. You've got to be able to keep people enthralled and entertained.
No, because in the book they talk about how it's a polluted environment and how this orange mist pervades the entire world. And we never see that in Blade Runner, but they did use that in Blade Runner 2049, the orange mist in the world. So they did borrow that from the sequel to that, put it in the movie.
Yeah. And so then you got someone like Rutger Hauer as our villain, who is, he passed earlier this year. Much love to him for all the work that he put out. It's just hard to even think of anyone else when you think of Rutger Hauer, to not think of Roy Batty as the villain. He is such an iconic villain. He's maybe one of the top 10 villains in cinema.
No, there's a certain charisma. You wonder why replicants would even follow him, and when you finally encounter him, you understand why.
Yeah. And it's for the same reason. We talked a couple weeks ago on our Dr. Sleep review about great villains being somebody that you connect with and you identify with.
Yeah.
He is a man who has just minimal time left on this earth, and all he wants is to live. At the same time, he's willing to do horrible things to get him there.
Right. Does he have empathy? He doesn't really have empathy. Yeah. He does not put it in a system.
And it plays into that question of humanity. Are we human? And I think really the big message of Blade Runner is try to be more human. Try to, whether you are human or not, to try to be a humane person.
Yeah.
And that's something that, Deckard struggles with. That's something that...
No, he shoots a one in the back.
Yeah. And he's not apologetic about it. He's just, that's what's happening. So you get someone like Roy Batty who... anything in service of his mission, even though his mission is a noble one, to live, to get purpose. And yeah, like you said, he may have lived more in his time than any of the other characters, just because of what he knew he had of his time limit on Earth.
I do like it. Rutger Hauer did write his own soliloquy that's in the movie about all the things that his character saw and all of it. And then how once he is gone, that all the things that experience are going to be gone too. It's not going to be able to be shared, and it's one of those self-conscious things of, wow, that's are you, even though you're a replicant, but there are little components that make you a human. Yeah,
I think when he was brought into, he decided he wanted to play this replicant as someone who has emotion or a sense of emotion, and he has sensational feeling. Even though he's robotic. And I think that's kind of a cool thing for him. If you see that soliloquy that he does at the end of the film, if you read the one that's written for him, he made a very good choice in writing his own thing, because it was just ridiculous work. But he really pulled out, and he took some things that you might consider silly and related them to the humanity of the inhumane character that he plays. Yeah. And again, that kind of really blurs the lines between what is human and what is not.
Because they use that person and they live with him. When the character that they play on his emotional triggers of somebody feeling sorry for somebody, they're living on the street and they take them in. But are you using that person, or is that person being good, or a person just are you just conditioned to do something? So it's a lot of things that Philip K. Dick is working on this story.
Yep. And as far as the other replicants in the film, one of my favorites was Pris. Daryl Hannah's character, and I know that it was brought down to 4 or 5 people that were kind of competing for this role, and each one had to create a look for the character, which I think is a really cool screen test. Is you create the character. She took a lot from Nosferatu, and that's kind of where she's got the pale face and everything that too. And she's also the only one that didn't really try to be pretty in her screen test. She tried to be something dark and playful, and she's the child of the group, if you will.
Yeah, she doesn't really.
She's playing with her toys. She's out by the toys in that big sequence she gets where she's fighting Deckard. It's a really cool character who doesn't really get too much dialogue. and a lot of hers is done through those coy, slight emotional changes.
Yes.
The physical changes, especially when
Yeah.
she's talking with Sebastian, who's suffering from a complete opposite in that his body is aging faster than normal, and her body isn't aging, but she has limited time all the same.
Limited time. So it's another play reversal of contrast of that's wonderful that adds to the story.
Yep, it really like elevates kind of like where they're going at, and that's how she finds a human who's able to empathize with her. Maybe a guy who's a little bit weaker to like in his wills too. He just wants someone to hang out with.
Yeah.
I think that was pretty cool. I also really like Zora, Joanna Cassidy's character, who we mentioned. She kind of has this physicality and sensuality to her, very portrayed like very Amazonian almost. Where
Yes.
she's like just like
Yes.
really strong and very beautiful and very frightening at the same time. So. She's one of those characters that we get, again, small amount of time with, but that's something that Ridley Scott is really effective here in the film, is that he gives big characters and small characters so much fleshing out, in all these different characters that come through. And I would say the same thing about Edward James Olmos as Gaff. Very few scenes in the film, but he cared so much about this character, and he's the one who comes up with the city speak. Of kind of like using these different languages, something that we later see in like Firefly, where we get the melding of languages.
Right, yeah, they use a lot of Chinese in there, but he uses sometimes Spanish a little bit or something.
Yeah, and he's got some Hungarian he pulls out there. In fact, when you first see him introduced and he's talking to Deckard's character, he refers to him as a horse male appendage in Hungarian, which apparently in Hungary people just loved in the theaters.
There's something, a lot of what they took from this movie Blade Runner, and they use in The Fifth Element of mixing up languages, and everybody pretty much is bilingual, at least in their Fifth Element.
Yeah.
They also used Bruce Willis' character Corbin Dallas is eating Chinese food.
Yep.
Which Deckard does by himself. He's eating Chinese food. So
Yeah,
it's almost like an homage.
You see it bleeding through to things like The Fifth Element. I see things like even like Firefly a little bit, where they kind of have that melding of cultures. Even the Disney film Big Hero 6 has like New Tokyo or Neo Okio or something like that is like their version of melding of cultures. And it was, I don't know if it was really done before Blade Runner, but it's definitely one of those science fiction elements where like that makes sense. Yeah,
and it's one of the first. That movie was the first time you've seen full building advertisements that just bombard your life, and that was it was. We see that now. Now we're comfortable. We're living in Blade Runner.
Yeah, exactly.
But
you see
at the time, wow, somebody just projected on the side of a building an advertisement for like Coca-Cola, whatever.
Yeah.
But it definitely, it's ahead of its time, and now we're in it.
Yeah, and I think turning our direction to like the visual aesthetic of the film, because this is one of those movies I think you can pull a screenshot out of it and you're like, that's Blade Runner. Like right there, you know what everything that it is.
Just,
what's amazing to me is the fact that they were able to achieve so much of that in camera. Like almost all the visual effects for what they are in the film are done in camera. That sequence, like right at the opening with Hades, where they've got these like fire booming up and going like that, they had to, since they didn't have like anything that they could do with visual effects, it really came down to these little like cardboard cutout like buildings in the background, and then just smoking the heck out of it, where you couldn't see anything but the smoke and the environment and the fog kind of lifting in. And then they had to, for every single one of those fire explosions, they had to film it again. So they ran the camera through one pass, rewound the camera, refilmed over that, and did an explosion. So where it was projected onto that. And so they did it 17 times. And they said like they were so terrified when they took the film out that it wasn't just going to be in ribbons because of just having to run over the film that many times with it. There was even an accident where they were filming that pyramid at the beginning where they tried to do some weird things with it near the end of the pyramid, burst into flames. And they couldn't afford to rebuild it. So they're like, hopefully we have enough to do this right now. The film was kind of like running on that because the first production company ran out of money before they even started filming, and so they had to kind of work with Warner Brothers and the Ladd Company to get the film going again, and then it went notoriously over budget again. They were trying not to, but it's like a film like this
needs
things
money.
Keep happening, and like things keep kind of evolving.
Because there's no CGI, you have to do it practical, and the whole lifting. I mean, you obviously providing a world that's very intense. That gives sets the tone.
Yeah. And that's where it's really blessed that it has a director like Ridley Scott. And I'm critical of Ridley Scott as an editing force. He does so many director's cuts that I think are less quality than the actual original cut of the film. This is one for me where like his final cut, the one that he did perfects it, but like it's a rarity in the sense that he's a much better director than he is a guy putting it all together at the end. But he's also, as a director, he was able to shut down the people that were coming to try and replace him. People would show up to set with the idea, I'm going to fire Ridley Scott today. And he just sent him packing. Like, he was like, nope, not dealing with that today. So you kind of need someone like him to control a set like this because there was just so many things going on all at once.
It does show out that
stress levels like were just peaking throughout the whole thing. Harrison Ford was not having fun making this movie at all. The only highlight I remember hearing about was his scenes with Rutger Hauer. He said that was some of the best performing and that he got to do with someone else.
And it's probably the most physically demanding.
Yeah. Yeah. But like there were things where like he, especially with his time with Coppola, with Lucas, with Spielberg, he was involved in that creative process. He was able to kind of put forth his ideas and feel that inclusion. He didn't get that with Blade Runner because Scott was actually more focused on Sean Young, who was such a like young performer at that time, and he was like really focused on making sure that she got it right. And Ford was actually kind of angry about this because he wanted to be involved in that stuff. There's even some great audio stuff of him recording voiceover where he's just like, this is dumb, this is insane, what are we doing? Which I think is just fantastic. It like peak Harrison Ford, grumpy old man in like 82. So
he's in Blade Runner 2049 he was a grumpy old man.
I guess for me, like the whole film just felt to me like something that shouldn't have worked. And in fact, since there are like 7 or 8 cuts of it, not all of them do work. Do you have a specific cut of the film that you like, or
the director's cut? The first director's cut.
The 1986 or 91.
Yeah, when they interjected the racing horse.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that was, and a lot of creative people like to keep. They can't finish. They like to tinker. We know that about George Lucas, but I think that one really projected the unresolved, that we don't know what Deckard is.
Okay.
Yeah.
For me, it's the final cut, the one that came out in 2007, where I think that everything just got cleaned up really nice, and it was cool to go back. I went and watched.
If you watch it on high def.
Oh right? Yeah. I watched some like footage on what they actually did to clean things up. There's a notorious moment for Zora, an action sequence in which they got a performer that doesn't look anything like her with this really bad wig, jumping through the glass, and they went and actually reshot the footage with Zora.
Okay.
Like 25 years later, and they digitally de-aged her and like shot her over a green screen of doing this.
I have no idea this happened.
It's incredible. It is so cool that they actually did this. There's also a sequence in which Harrison Ford is talking to a guy about the snake, the guy that sells the snakes.
Yeah.
And if you watch the scene in the theatrical cut, his lips don't match the dialogue. And so they brought in Harrison Ford's son to do a mouth tape where his son spoke the words, and then they like digitally took the mouth and put it in the scene, and you can't even tell. Like it's so well done. I think like that's something where like coming through and cleaning up a film.
Now I know. Okay, now I'm gonna have to watch this and change.
Now you'll know why I spent all weekend talking about this. For me, like when I watched the director's cut of the film, I didn't like it. And it might have been my preconceived notions of walking into it thinking it's going to be a sci-fi epic, but I was like, I was kind of bored, and I was a little lost too, which I'll get it. I was watching it pretty late at night. I probably wasn't paying enough attention.
It's one of those things that a lot of people have a minus for, is you can't just, it's an action movie, you can't just change your, shut off or not focus or be distracted. This is definitely something where you can actually just push pause and come back into, and probably even demands it. I think it works better sometimes if you're for viewing, just to view it at home rather than in a movie theater, because if you watch in a movie theater, it is long, it's drawn, there's some scenes that are kind of tiring. A lot of people's biggest complaint is it's a boring movie because there's not a lot going on, and there's just beautiful scenery. That's the big minus from it. For me, I just think it's a cinematic, beautiful projecting.
Yeah, and I think if you look at it as a film noir film that has sci-fi elements instead of a science fiction film that has film noir elements,
you're absolutely right.
You kind of see what the film is, and that's kind of, again, like that's on us as the audience. It's also on I think what a really poor marketing campaign, because they sold the film based on action. If you watch some of the trailers,
even the cover looks like it's gonna be
everything about it, like they've got that really nice, like he's got the gun and he's kind of everything about it just feels like, and even the title Blade Runner just sounds like Logan's Run. Like we're gonna go on like,
action and jump
shoot them up a lot. And I think it's a poor marketing campaign, and preconceived notions about someone like Harrison Ford, which I think he turns in a good performance, but doesn't look the character that we want him to. And so that's why I would tell people, like, this is a film I think researching ahead of time helps.
It does.
I think this is one where going into it, you can enjoy it more for what it is. And I think that's why in my second viewing, I adored the film. I'm really happy I went back and watched it a second time.
I think the second viewing is the best one.
Yep, and that's I was hearing some people say that they believe why the film had such a resurgence was because of home video.
Yes. Yep.
Because people were able to pause, rewind, watch it again, that the film kind of breathed a new life into itself. Because you're right. The work print didn't work when they tried, doing test screenings. Then the theatrical cut didn't work, and then they got rid of that terrible voiceover narration to it, which the voiceover was written to the film, deleted from the screenplay, then rewritten hastily to like shoot back into it.
So you got refried, reheated, baked,
and you hear certain things, and you're like, some people like the voiceover, some people really don't.
Yeah.
I was reading something with Guillermo del Toro where he says the only version of the film you can watch is the version with the voiceover. That's what he grew up on, and that's what he adores.
Yeah.
If you look at Frank Darabont, who directed things like The Shawshank Redemption, which had its own experience of failing at the box office and then re-giving life.
It had a life after the box office.
And things like The Green Mile, he said that the ending of the film has this, this great moment with Rutger Hauer and Harrison Ford's character that ends on such a moment where he was crying in the theater, and then they cut to a voiceover thing from Harrison Ford, who just sounds tired doing this voiceover, and he goes, "I hated that moment because it took this beautiful moment, and it goes, I've got something to say about all this," and it took him out of the film.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's important to kind of know like which version, and that's a big thing online. Which version do I watch? And I think like anything but the theatrical cut is a better version than
You're
the
absolutely
cut.
Right. Yes.
And I think finding it, directors or final cut are both pretty fine versions where there's just tweaks really between the two of them. I guess final thoughts on the film, like what do you think about it overall? And
it's a classic film, and it's not a sci-fi film. I don't want to say it's a sci-fi film. This is a very heavy noir. This is your Dashiell Hammett, Ray Chandler kind of a movie, and it's sold that way of being a replicant. You're playing a role, right? Of overly playing a role. Are you really like this person because it's just something unique? Or are you conditioned to like this person? And there's some heavy themes that Philip K. Dick and Ridley Scott are investigating with this movie, and you're not going to get answers.
Yeah. You'll get answers if you want answers, and you'll get answers if you're a big fan of the sequel, like I am. Like,
yes,
kind of basically say to you,
I'm
like,
trying to
avoid how it is. But as its own film, like you can walk away from it and really have your own thoughts. And even like the sequel doesn't embrace any one version of the film. It doesn't embrace any one answer either. It's kind of loose enough.
There's a mystery to that one as well.
Yeah, there's its own like completely bonkers mystery. I'm gonna probably watch that when I get done here. For me, I'm gonna disagree with you. I'm gonna say it is science fiction. I'm gonna say it embodies everything that science fiction is best at doing. And the reason why I say that is we're coming to a film 1982, 5 years after Star Wars. Star Wars, one of the biggest flaws with the way people interpret Star Wars is they see that as a science fiction film. Star Wars is a fantasy. There is nothing science-based around Star Wars. There's space wizards with green light sticks hitting each other with them. Like, that is what Star Wars is, and it's great at that in fantasy.
Yeah.
But then you look at it, like, science fiction is supposed to show us a version of ourselves through the lens of either like science we have today or science we very well could have down the road. Some of the people that talk about Star Trek, for example, talk about the fact that people now have iPads that are exactly what they would do.
Or there's scientific theories that apply to it.
Yeah, and things that have that it paved the way for scientifically. There are people that have watched Blade Runner who right now might be working on flying cars. Like it teaches us all what the best of us can be, but it also tells human stories through the lens of science-based storytelling. And I think, the notion of humanity, the notion of empathy, of artificial intelligence is perfect in that level of science fiction. Yeah. And I would agree with you that there's so many of those film noir elements that really work well in there. And it's also, film noir also has this tendency to not make you feel good at the end. Like, film noir rarely ever ends in a place where you're like,
not supposed
golly,
to, right?
I'm going to go have some cookies and milk now. I'm feeling pretty good about it.
But two different perspectives, I think, epitomizes what Blade Runner it's not a definitive answer.
Yeah, much like every version of it.
Every version is there.
There's a new version of Blade Runner every time someone watches it for the first time, because that is somebody experiencing this film in a completely different way. I made my wife watch it 2 years ago on Christmas. And I don't know why.
Yeah. But there's some people who think it's wonderful, magnificent. There's people that think it's god awful.
Yeah, and it's a film that surprises you, because again, like when I showed her this on Christmas 2 years ago, I was thinking the whole time, I was like, she's gonna hate this movie. I don't know why. I just in my head like she's not gonna like it, and she came out going, I'd like to watch that again.
Okay.
So it's a film that I would say, if you have no interest in Blade Runner, do a little bit of research. Like watch some people talk about it. Try not to get too much into the spoilers of it, but do your research on it. I think it's maybe a film if you're a film fan. Yeah, maybe even read the book. Kind of like dip your toe in to the Blade Runner world, because I think you may find that it's a lot better and it's a lot more suitable for you than you might think. And I guess
agree.
It's one of those things you take with you, like just like we did. I take a lot of the sci-fi parts of it, and they've influenced my storytelling as a science fiction person. I know that they've influenced you with your
noirs,
with your noir work.
I mean, you have a happy ending, and
you have plug time. You have a comic book. Like, tell us about the Greenway really quick, and is there anything that comes to mind that Blade Runner inspired there?
So we got these are the Greenway noir comic books available on indieplanet.com. We'll put the link down below if you want it. 1968 noirs, and definitely Blade Runner is one of the inspirations, even though it's not sci-fi. So yeah, check it out.
Yeah, definitely. It's a world. If you come out of it loving film noir, go read The Greenway. If you come out of it thinking more about the science fiction elements, still go read The Greenway. That's about it for us. Let's real quick, I guess. Let's just say really quick, like on a scale of 1 to 10. Where's Blade Runner sit for you? Is it a top tier film, or?
It's a solid 8.
Okay.
It's a solid 8. Yeah. There's definitely some things I would agree with a lot of people. There are some boring elements. It's a little slow. It's a little bit clunky, but I think it gels really well. There's a great it's beautiful.
For me, it's funny. I'm gonna go with a 9. Out of 10, but the funny thing is, the first time I watched it was probably more of a 4, and every time I watch it, it goes up like a half point. So maybe I'll watch it 2 more times, and I'll be like, "You're crazy! It's perfect the way it is." So,
and then a couple of years later, you go back down.
Yeah. So all I can suggest you guys watch the film at least once, maybe watch it again, and then let us know your thoughts. Comment down below, like, subscribe if you guys are interested at all. Please make sure to check out our Patreon as well. Support some independent content creators.
We appreciate it.
Take a look at that. We got some pretty cool tiers over there as well. And check out some of our other works too. Like I said before, you can check out Nick's book, The Greenway, and listen to his podcast. Nick, where can the people find you? I'm
on the St. Paul Filmcast. I host and interview filmmakers, and you can find us on all major podcast distributors.
Okay. And you can find all of my many reviews on goatfilmreviews.com. Occasionally you'll hear my sultry tones on Nick's podcast as well. Yes. Thank you guys for joining us. Like I said, go check out the film. It's fantastic. And now is a perfect time to watch it. It's November 2019. We're in Los Angeles, maybe. Enjoy the show, and we'll hear from you next time. See you guys.